On February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California, a baby boy was born to a young, unmarried couple. They were not ready to raise a child. With heavy hearts and uncertain futures, they made one of the hardest decisions of their lives. They put the baby up for adoption. That baby boy would grow up to change the world. His name was Steve Jobs. He was adopted by a humble working-class couple named Paul and Clara Jobs. They were not rich, they were not famous, but they gave him one priceless gift: love and support. Paul Jobs was a mechanic. He loved to work with his hands. In their small garage, he showed young Steve how to take things apart and put them back together. He explained how machines worked. He explained why details mattered. And even as a child, Steve understood one thing very clearly. Your work should be beautiful, even the parts that no one can see. Steve was a curious, intelligent, and sometimes difficult child. He didn't like school, he didn't like rules, he didn't like being told what to do. Teachers often complained that he was rebellious. But his mind was different. He thought differently. He dreamed differently. He questioned everything. One of the most important people in his life was his childhood friend Steve Wozniak, a shy but brilliant electronics genius. While Steve Jobs had the vision, Wozniak had the technical skills. Together, they were a perfect team. As teenagers, they would sit for hours talking about electronics, computers, and how technology could change the world. At that time, computers were huge machines used only by governments and big companies. No one believed that ordinary people would ever need one at home. But Steve believed it. One day, everyone will have a computer in their home, he said. People laughed, but Steve never listened to the crowd. He dropped out of college after only 6 months. He didn't want to study subjects he didn't care about. But even after dropping out, he secretly continued to attend classes that interested him, including calligraphy. He learned about beautiful letters and spaces between them. Years later, this strange interest would help him design the beautiful fonts of the first Macintosh computer. At only 21 years old, inside a small garage with very little money, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak built their first computer. They called it Apple I. They sold their own belongings to make it happen. Jobs sold his Volkswagen van, Wozniak sold his calculator. That garage in California became the birthplace of one of the most powerful companies in the world, Apple Inc. Soon, Apple II was released. Then came more investors, more workers, more money. The small garage turned into a big company. Steve Jobs became a millionaire at the age of 23. But money was never his main goal. He wanted to create something that would change human life forever. In 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh computer, the first computer with a graphical user interface and a mouse. It was beautiful, simple, and revolutionary. Steve Jobs stood on stage, proud and smiling. The world was in shock. He was not just a businessman. He was a visionary. But as Apple grew, so did problems inside the company. Steve was very demanding. He expected perfection. He shouted. He pushed people to their limits. The company leaders thought he was too difficult to work with. And then, the unthinkable happened. In 1985, Steve Jobs was fired from the very company that he had created. Yes, the man who built Apple was kicked out of Apple. When Steve Jobs walked out of Apple in 1985, the world believed his greatest story was already finished. He was only 30 years old. Most people, when they are rejected by their own creation, fall into darkness. Some never recover. Some disappear quietly. Some accept defeat and live a normal, forgettable life. But Steve Jobs was not made for a normal life.
Inside his heart, a strange mixture of anger, sadness, and creativity started to grow into something powerful. He later said that being fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him, although at that time it felt like the worst pain imaginable. He was suddenly free. Free from expectations, free from pressure, free to start again. So he did exactly that. The birth of Next, a second beginning. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs started a new company called Next. He wanted to build computers for universities, scientists, and researchers. He wanted to design the most advanced machine ever created. Every tiny detail had to be perfect, from the shape of the case, to the sound of the keyboard, to the look of the screen. Engineers complained. They said he was impossible to satisfy. But Steve had a simple rule. Good is not enough. It must be perfect. Although Next computers were not very successful in the market, the technology inside them was years ahead of its time. In fact, many years later, Apple would use this same technology as the foundation for macOS and iOS. Even when he failed, he was secretly building the future. Pixar, the hidden treasure. At the same time, Steve Jobs bought a small, struggling animation company from George Lucas for $10 million. It was called Pixar. Everyone thought this was a stupid decision. Animation movies were risky. The company was close to bankruptcy. Jobs had to put in more and more of his own money just to keep it alive. But he believed in the people there. He believed in creativity. He believed in storytelling. He believed in dreams. In 1995, Pixar released a movie named Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated film. It became a massive success. Children loved it. Adults loved it. The entire film industry changed forever. Pixar, once almost dead, became one of the most valuable animation studios in the world. Steve Jobs became a billionaire again. But something even more incredible was about to happen. The return of the king to Apple. In the late 1990s, Apple was dying. The company that Jobs had started was now close to bankruptcy. Sales were falling, products were confusing, people had lost interest. Many believed that Apple's end was near. And then, the unthinkable happened. In 1997, Apple bought Next, Steve Jobs' new company, and with it, Steve Jobs returned to Apple. At first, he came back as a simple advisor, but very quickly the company realized there was only one man who could save Apple. He became the CEO again. But Apple was no longer a small garage company. It was now a giant on the edge of death. Steve stood in front of the employees and said something they would never forget. Apple is not dead. Apple is waiting to be reborn. He removed 70% of Apple's products. He simplified everything, and he focused only on a few great ideas instead of many weak ones. Then, in 1998, Apple released a new computer, the iMac. It was colorful, beautiful, simple, friendly. People fell in love with it instantly. For the first time in years, Apple started to grow again. But Steve was not finished. Not even close. The birth of the iPod, music in your pocket. In 2001, Steve Jobs walked onto the stage and pulled the tiny white device out of this pocket. It was the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket, he said. The world gasped. Until that moment, people had to carry bulky CD players and bags of discs. Suddenly, the entire music world fit inside a small device. The iPod changed how people listened to music forever. Apple was no longer just a computer company. It was becoming a lifestyle company. The iPhone, a revolution in your hands. Then came the year 2007. This moment alone changed the entire world. On stage, Steve Jobs held 3 products and said this: "Today, Apple is introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communication device." Then he paused and smiled. And these are not 3 separate devices. It is one device. We call it the iPhone. The crowd exploded. The iPhone wasn't just a phone. It was a computer, a camera, a music player, a connection to the internet. The smartphone era was born. From that moment on, the world would never be the same. Communication changed. Business changed. Education changed. Human life changed. And it all came from one man's vision. The silent enemy: cancer. But while Steve Jobs was changing the world on the outside, a silent enemy was growing inside his body. In 2003, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, one of the most dangerous forms of cancer. Doctors told him the truth. His time was limited. For a while, he kept it secret. He continued working. He continued creating. He continued standing on stage with that familiar black turtleneck and blue jeans. But his body slowly grew weaker. In 2009, he finally took a medical leave from Apple. People noticed his thin face, his weak voice, his slow steps. The brilliant mind was still alive, but the body was fading. Yet even in his sickness, he continued to plan the future of Apple. He continued working on the iPhone, the iPad, and future products. He once said, "Your time is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life." He lived every moment with intensity, with meaning, with purpose. The final goodbye. On October 5th, 2011, the world received the news Steve Jobs had died at the age of 56. The world stood still. People cried who had never met him. Cities lit candles for him. Messages filled the internet. Apples were placed in front of Apple stores around the world. A man who had started in a small garage had touched nearly every human life on Earth. But he was not gone. Not really. He had left something far greater than money. He had left inspiration. His life whispered a message to every dreamer staring at a dark future. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. Never stop believing in your vision. And that message still lives on.
As Steve Jobs' life slowly moved toward its end, something strange and beautiful happened within him. The anger that once burned in his heart faded. The ego that once controlled his voice softened. The perfectionist who once demanded everything from everyone became a man who deeply understood time, life, and death. He was no longer only thinking about products. He was thinking about meaning. A man who understood death, understood life. In a famous speech at Stanford University in 2005, Steve Jobs stood before thousands of students and said words that still shake the world today. "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart." He told them 3 powerful stories about connecting the dots, about love and loss, about death. He explained that life does not make sense while you are living it. Only when you look backward, the dots connect. Every success, every failure, every pain, every rejection, all were preparing you for something greater. Being fired from Apple, creating Next, saving Pixar, coming back to Apple, creating the iPhone. All the dots connected. And as he spoke, he wasn't just talking to students. He was talking to you. To the person who feels lost. To the person who feels small. To the person who feels like giving up. His life was proof that even your worst moment can become your greatest beginning. The secret behind his success. People often ask, why was Steve Jobs different? What made him so powerful? How did he change the world? The answer is simple. He did not follow the market. He followed his heart. He did not create what people asked for. He created what people didn't even know they needed yet. He believed in beauty. He believed in simplicity. He believed that technology and art could work together. While others were trying to sell products, he was trying to create experiences. And that is a huge lesson for your life. If you want to be different, you must think different. If you want to be great, you must work different. If you want to change the world, you must believe different. Steve Jobs once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." He was one of them, and so can you be. His message for you, yes, you. Imagine Steve Jobs standing in front of you right now, looking into your eyes. This is what he would say. Don't wait for the perfect time. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone to save you. Your journey is your responsibility. If you have pain, use it. If you have fear, face it. If you have dreams, chase them. Even if the whole world laughs at you, let them laugh. One day, they will listen. You may be poor right now. You may be confused. You may feel behind in life. But remember, so was Steve Jobs. Adopted child, college dropout, fired from his own company, almost forgotten. But he stood up again and again and again until history had no choice but to remember his name. The last lesson. Shortly before his death, one of his friends asked him, "Do you wish you had more time?" Steve Jobs smiled weakly and said, "Time is the most valuable asset we have. Don't waste it." He understood that in the end, money doesn't matter. Fame doesn't matter. Status doesn't matter. What matters is what you created, who you inspired, how you lived. And his life was a masterpiece. The ending that never ends. Steve Jobs died in 2011, but he never really left. Every time someone unlocks an iPhone, every time a MacBook opens, every time an idea becomes reality, a little part of Steve Jobs is still alive. Because legends do not die. They live in the minds of dreamers. And if you're listening to this right now, if you are creating an audio, if you are learning English, if you are building your future, then his story is now part of your story. So when life becomes hard, when people doubt you, when the road seems too long, remember the words of Steve Jobs. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Your story is waiting to be written. Now go and write it.